Good evening. Tonight, we delve into one of Canada's most chilling family murders, a case that would expose the darkest shadows lurking behind closed doors and raise questions that, even today, remain hauntingly unanswered. June 30th, 2009, Kingston, Ontario. A black Nissan Sentra is discovered submerged in the northernmost lock of the Rideau Canal. Inside, 4 bodies, 3 teenage sisters, and a woman the family called their aunt. But this was no accident. The victims, Zainab Shafia, 19 years old, Sahar Shafia, 17, Geeti Shafia, just 13, and Rona Amir, 50 years old, a woman trapped in a polygamous marriage, living as a virtual servant in her own home. What police initially believed to be a tragic accident would soon unravel into something far more sinister, a tale of control, honor, and a family's darkest secrets. The Shafia family had fled Afghanistan in 1992, eventually settling in Montreal in 2007 after years in Pakistan, Australia, and Dubai, where patriarch Mohammad Shafia had amassed a fortune in real estate. They appeared to be living the immigrant dream, a prosperous businessman, 7 children, a new life in Canada. But beneath the surface, something was deeply, disturbingly wrong. Rona Amir Mohammad was Mohammad Shafia's first wife, married in an arranged union in Kabul. Unable to bear children, she had encouraged her husband to take a second wife. Enter Tooba Yahya in 1989. Tooba would give birth to 7 children, children that Rona helped raise as her own. But when the family immigrated to Canada, Rona was presented as a cousin, an aunt, her marriage erased, her identity hidden. Rona's diary tells a story of isolation and desperation. She described herself as a slave, a servant. She wrote of wandering in parks, crying. She begged for a divorce. She feared for her life. The Shafias held her passport, her identity documents. She believed she couldn't escape. And Rona's siblings would later tell investigators something chilling. In the days before her death, she was terrified. But Rona wasn't the only one trapped. The 3 Shafia daughters were struggling to navigate life between 2 worlds, the strict traditional rules of their household and the freedoms they saw their Canadian peers enjoying. Zainab and Sahar had secret boyfriends. They wore fashionable clothes. They resisted pressure to wear the hijab. And for this, according to prosecutors, they were marked for death. 13-year-old Geeti, the youngest victim, had been caught shoplifting. Expelled from class for wearing a shirt deemed too revealing, she had repeatedly begged teachers and child protection authorities to remove her from the family home. She wanted to run away. Nobody saved her. The evidence presented at trial painted a disturbing picture of life inside the Shafia household. Teachers testified that Sahar told them she faced physical, emotional, and verbal abuse, that she had tried to kill herself because she had enough and wanted to die. That after her suicide attempt, she received no help from her family. School officials were told the girls were being pressured, controlled, silenced, and yet they remained in that home. On June 30th, 2009, the family was supposedly returning to Montreal from a vacation in Niagara Falls. They had stopped at a motel in Kingston for the night. 2 rooms, 6 guests, the motel manager was told. But by morning, 4 of them were dead. Here's where the story gets even darker. The family's version of events? 19-year-old Zainab, an inexperienced, unlicensed driver, had taken the car keys in the middle of the night and gone for a joyride with her sisters and Rona. Somehow, the car ended up in the canal. A terrible accident. But investigators weren't convinced. Just hours after the bodies were discovered, the family's eldest son, Mohammad Shafia, reported an accident with the family's Lexus SUV in an empty parking lot in Montreal. Damage to the front end. A broken headlight. Coincidence? Police didn't think so. When authorities examined both vehicles, they developed a theory. The Lexus had been used to ram the Nissan into the locks. And there was something else. Something the family couldn't have known. The day before leaving Montreal for Niagara Falls, the Shafias had purchased that used Nissan Sentra for $5,000. Why buy a car just before a family trip? The investigation deepened. Police obtained wiretaps, and what they heard on those recordings would chill investigators to the bone. Mohammad Shafia, speaking to his wife Tooba and son Hamed, was recorded making disparaging remarks about the dead women. He spoke about the value of family honor, and in one conversation, captured just days after the deaths, he said something that would become central to the prosecution's case. God's curse on them. May the devil shit on their graves. Even if they hoist me up onto the gallows, nothing is more important than my honor. Honor. That word would echo through the courtroom for months. Police also found disturbing searches on the family laptop, a computer most often used by Hamed. Searches for where to commit a murder. Can a prisoner have control over his real estate? Searches for bodies of water. Searches conducted in the days before 4 women drowned. On July 23, 2009, Mohammad Shafia, Tooba Yahya, and their son Hamed were arrested. 4 counts of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, under the guise of what prosecutors called an honor killing. The trial began in October 2011. It would last nearly 3 months. The proceedings were conducted in 4 languages: English, French, Dari, and Spanish. A first for Canada. 58 witnesses testified. 165 exhibits were presented. The jury heard from teachers who described the girls' desperate pleas for help, from boyfriends who testified about forbidden relationships, from Rona's siblings who spoke of her fear. They listened to those chilling wiretaps over and over again. The forensic evidence was compelling, yet incomplete. The pathologist confirmed the 4 women had drowned, but he couldn't say where they drowned. The car was found in relatively shallow water, in first gear, ignition off, headlights off. The seats were reclined at awkward angles. None of the victims were wearing seatbelts. 1 window was open. Why didn't they try to escape? 3 of the 4 victims had fresh bruising on their heads. The Crown's theory: the women were drowned elsewhere or incapacitated, then placed in the car. The car was positioned at the lock, put into gear, and pushed into the water using the family's Lexus. Pieces of the SUV's headlight were found at the scene. But the defense argued, without conclusive proof, how could anyone know for certain what happened that night? Perhaps it was an accident. The accused all took the stand in their own defense. Each proclaimed their innocence. Mohammad Shafia wept as he testified. He called honor killings heinous and terrible. He insisted his family was liberal, that he let his children wear and do what they wanted. He claimed his daughters had been cruel to him. Tooba Yahya broke down in tears multiple times. She disputed claims of abuse. She said she had a good relationship with Rona. She testified that the restrictions on the children were minimal. They just weren't allowed to date until they finished high school. And then she admitted something shocking. Yahya confessed that she had lied to police during her interrogation. She had told officers she was present at the canal that night, that she heard a splash and then fainted. But in court, she said this was fabricated, made up under pressure. She claimed she thought her son was being tortured by police, and she needed to say what they wanted to hear. It was all lies, she testified. But if she lied, then how could the jury believe her now? Mohammad Shafia, the eldest son, gave yet another version of events to a private investigator. He claimed he had followed his sisters in the Lexus and accidentally rear-ended their car when they stopped at the lock. While he was picking up pieces of broken headlight, the Nissan plunged into the water. He said he called their names, dangled a rope, but when no one responded, he fled to Montreal. He staged an accident to cover the damage to the SUV. He was too afraid of his father's anger to report what happened. His lawyer would argue that Hamed was guilty of being stupid, but not murder. The prosecution painted a very different picture. They argued this was premeditated murder, carefully planned. The family patriarch was enraged that his daughters wanted boyfriends, that they were betraying traditional Afghan values. Sahar and Geeti were killed because they couldn't be trusted to keep quiet after Zainab's death. And Rona was expendable, a witness who had to be eliminated. Crown Attorney Gerard Larhuis told the jury, "This was a plot to kill 4 women because they had tainted the family's honor. On January 29, 2012, after 15 hours of deliberation, the jury reached their verdict. Guilty. Mohammad Shafia, Tooba Yahya, and Mohammad Shafia were each found guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder, automatic life sentences, no possibility of parole for 25 years. When the verdict was read, one female juror began crying. Mohammad grabbed the prisoner's box for support, his parents rubbing his back as each juror affirmed the decision. When Judge Robert Moranger asked if they wished to say anything, each defendant declared their innocence. "We didn't commit the murder, and this is unjust," Mohammad Shafia said through a translator. "Your honorable justice, this is not just. I am not a murderer, and I am a mother," Tooba Yahya pleaded. Mohammad Shafia said in English, "Sir, I did not drown my sisters anywhere." Judge Moranger's words were scathing. He called the murders despicable and heinous. He said the apparent reason for these cold-blooded, shameful murders was that the 4 completely innocent victims had offended the defendant's completely twisted concept of honor. He continued, "That has absolutely no place in any civilized society." Outside the courthouse, Crown Attorney Larhuis called it a good day for Canadian justice. He said the verdict sent a very clear message about our Canadian values and core principles in a free and democratic society. But the case sparked intense debate across the nation. Muslim organizations condemned the murders, calling them un-Islamic. 34 imams issued a fatwa denouncing honor killings, domestic violence, and misogyny. The Afghan embassy called the deaths a heinous crime against humanity, and insisted such acts are not part of Afghan or Islamic culture. Yet the question remained, should these murders be called honor killings or simply domestic violence? Some argued that labeling them honor killings creates distance from a crime that is, tragically, all too common. Statistics showed that from 2000 to 2009, an average of 58 women per year were killed in Canada as a result of spousal violence. In that same period, 67 children and young people were murdered by family members. Only 12 or 13 were classified as honor killings. Writer Pascal Fournier, in the Ottawa Citizen, pointed to what she called a greater tragedy, the failure of the state to intervene before the murders occurred. Vulnerable groups from immigrant communities, she argued, need the most protection, but rarely get it. The Shafia daughters had reached out. They had told teachers. They had spoken to child protection services. Geeti had begged to be removed from her home, and yet they were sent back, again and again. 3 of the Shafia children survived, 2 girls and a boy. They were placed under social services care while their parents and eldest brother stood trial. One of the surviving sons testified, unable to believe his family could commit murder. He told police his father had hit them, yes, but murder? Impossible. During the trial, this young boy ran up to the glass partition in the courtroom and kissed his father through the barrier. What does a child do when their family is torn apart by unimaginable violence? The Shafia case forced Canada to confront uncomfortable questions about immigration and integration, about protecting vulnerable women and children, about the line between cultural sensitivity and enabling abuse, about when intervention becomes necessary, and what happens when we fail to act. But even now, with the convictions secured and the defendants behind bars, mysteries remain. Where exactly did those 4 women die? Were they conscious when the car entered the water? If they were incapacitated or already dead? How? What happened in those final moments? The bruising on their heads suggests violence, but the full truth of that night may never be known. And there's another question that haunts this case, a question whispered in the shadows of the courtroom, in the words left unspoken. If the teachers knew, if the child protection workers knew, if Rona's siblings suspected something terrible was coming, could these 4 women have been saved? 4 tombstones stand in a Montreal cemetery: Zainab, Sahar, Geeti, and Rona. For nearly 3 years after her burial, Geeti's headstone bore the wrong birth date, Sahar's instead of her own. In life and in death, writer Michael Friscolanti observed, they had no voice, no one to save them, no one who even cares enough to fix Geeti's headstone. The Shafia family murders remain one of Canada's most disturbing cases, a reminder that evil can hide behind any door, that honor twisted into something dark and unrecognizable, can become a justification for the unthinkable, and that sometimes the most dangerous place for a woman or child is their own home. Mohammad Shafia, Tooba Yahya, and Mohammad Shafia will spend decades behind bars. But the questions their crimes raised continue to echo. How many others are suffering in silence? How many desperate pleas go unheard? And when someone finally asks for help, will we listen? The trial may be over, the verdict delivered. Justice in the legal sense has been served. But for Zainab, Sahar, Geeti, and Rona, justice came too late. 4 women, 4 lives cut short, and in a shallow canal in Kingston, Ontario, secrets that may never fully come to light. This has been our investigation into the Shafia family murders, a case that reminds us that some darkness cannot be escaped, and some truths remain forever submerged. Good night.